Hello, everybody. It's 8 p.m. Perth time. My name's Connor McDonald. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me. If not, throw something in the chat and I'll give the impression that I'm trying to fix it, whereas in reality, I'll just be fumbling around. But we've done a few of these now, office hours, so hopefully you can see and hear me without too much grief. Welcome along. We're marching through March. The year continues. You'll be pleased to know that we have cracked the magic 200 mark. Yes, we are well into now over 200 office hours since the inception of office hours. That's 200 hours or thereabouts of free access to content inside the Oracle organization. I hope you're getting as much value from it as we enjoy doing it. And obviously, the more attendees we get, the more valuable it is in terms of the more it gets exposure inside Oracle, and the more experts inside the company we can encourage to come along, even though we've already got stacks. A few things I should warn you, I have fly spray here. And the reason I have fly spray is there has been one fly all day long, just lingering around my screen. So if in the middle of this office hours session, I just jump up and start chasing something around, you'll know that fly has come back to roost. Thank you very much for attending. I know that this is in direct competition with the Oracle User Group in Norway event, which starts on a cruise today. I saw some tweets about that. I've been to that event. It's a fantastic event. So if you ever get a chance to go to the cruise conference in Norway, I can strongly recommend it. But if not, obviously we're here tonight on our office hours session. I'm just actually back in Perth, and I'm only back in Perth for 24 hours before I head off to Holland for the Apex conference starting next week. Takes me a while to get there. So I have to admit, I've got a few questions tonight, but if I run out of questions, then I will quite happily pull the pin early so I can get to unpacking my suitcase from the last trip so I can actually get back to packing the suitcase for the next trip. To keep you hopefully entertained if we do run out of time or do run out of questions, I banged out a new video today, and there'll be 3 new videos popping out next week on my YouTube channel. But without further ado, let's get into some slides. Let's have a look-see. So hopefully you can see that. Now, as I normally put at the end of each office hour session, just making sure I'm on my screen there. Yep. As I normally do at the end, at each office hour session, all the content in the slides appears at the bottom left, not centered. And you might be thinking, why is that the case? The reason we do that is when we turn this into a video after the fact, we put my ugly mug in the top right-hand corner, and we put the slide content in the bottom left-hand corner, so you can, well, let's just say, enjoy both experiences for the entire session. So no need to worry about the content being twisted and down the left. That's just how we do it. So first of all, let's cover off some bits and pieces before we get into the questions. Number one, on a serious note, and this is probably one of the few times I'll downgrade my joviality. Obviously, we saw the events in New Zealand last week. It's fairly close to my obviously region of the earth, and I have no one directly impacted, but I have some friends of friends who have lost loved ones. So I put that picture up there. There's a link there, so if you are motivated to go make a donation to help out the families of the victims, there's a nice simple link there, bit.ly/NZ help. But that's all I can suggest on that one. A couple other things, calendar-wise. Oracle OpenWorld and Oracle Code 1 submissions, I think, close tomorrow. They were going to close last week, but now they actually got extended by a week, so they close tomorrow. So I'd strongly recommend you put an abstract in. Now, don't get me wrong, I know exactly what people are thinking on the call. They're saying, why would I bother putting an abstract in? You know, so few abstracts get picked for OpenWorld and Code 1. You know, it's just going to be a waste of my time. I'll respond to that, you know, with an acknowledgement of the fact that it is very hard to get selected for these events. There are so many abstracts, so many people around the world who want to come to these events and speak at them, which is a great thing. It's good that they're sharing the knowledge. And I concede, obviously, that a whole stack of them are reserved slots for Oracle Corporation speakers. That should not be something that stops you from submitting a paper, though. And the reason I say that is, if you don't submit a paper, obviously you're where you are today. You're just no different to where you are today. If you do submit a paper, Well, two things is going to happen. One is it's going to get rejected, or the other thing is it's going to get accepted. If it gets accepted, you've just won yourself a $1,000 free pass to one of these events. That is obviously nothing to sneeze at. But even if you get rejected, it doesn't really matter. What you've done now is you now have a working abstract that you can use to submit, just cut and paste to other conferences. So you can only benefit by submitting an abstract to a conference. And rest assured, I've obviously spoken at many, many conferences. I can guarantee you, for every conference I've spoken at, I've had my submissions rejected 10 times over. So it's not something of just, if you're experienced or if you've been around the speaker circuit for a while, you're going to get accepted. It doesn't work like that. Work on quality, but also quantity. Make sure you reach out to lots of conferences, but in particular, OpenWorld and Code One, because they close tomorrow. And a really good website is set up by a couple of friends of mine called clockwise.org. If you ever go there, they take submissions, not abstract submissions, they take people's event dates. So they put in when the papers open, when the call for papers open, when it closes, and then you can actually get an idea of what conferences are coming up. So just a reminder, submit for those two conferences. It's important. I've just got back from Oracle Code in Bangalore. That was a fun experience, lots of fun there. I think a couple of thousand registered attendees and about 1,000 rolled up. Really good fun event. The only reason I'm mentioning it is because that's a picture from my talk there, and I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet. There were two talks on SQL. Gavin Sorma, who's actually also a Perth guy, did a talk on SQL tuning, and I did a talk on SQL processing. And from where I saw, looking around the conference, they were pretty much the two best attended talks, with the exception of the keynote. So it's funny how Oracle Code is obviously a developer conference, but for those of you on the call, and I imagine this is most of you who are predominantly have your expertise in the SQL and PL SQL side of things and in the database in general, that's proof that SQL is still pretty much the dominant factor in terms of content, in terms of interest, and in terms of furthering a developer's career. So really good event and really good fun. One small story I'll share with you before we get into the questions is, on the way back to the airport from the conference, the driver was cruising along, and anyone that's been to India knows that the drivers generally are very, very flexible with their use of lanes. But my driver was entering a sweeping bend, as you can see on the screen there, and he continued straight on. And the reason he did that is because when I looked at him, he'd fallen asleep. And literally, only as I yelled out, "Wake up!" we just avoided going literally off the freeway, off a bridge, and into the great beyond. So that was a nice, interesting way to close out the event. I've let the relevant hotel chain know, as well as going ballistic on Twitter. But yeah, so that was a nice little hair-raising moment that nearly brought a vast end to my DBA career. But last bits and pieces for you. And this is a good one. Last month, I put this slide up, 18C Express Edition with a very sad face. And I made an apology about how it wasn't out yet for Windows and people were waiting for it. And I gave my sincerest apologies. 6 hours after I finished the office hours session, the thing goes live. Oh, geez, I feel like an absolute fool. But yes, it literally went live the day of that office hours session. I found out literally as I got off the call. So smiley face now, 18C Express Edition has been out for a month now on Windows. I've already done a couple of videos on it. You can go to my YouTube channel on that. You can do some scary things with 18C Express Edition. For a free database, I did a demo with SwingBench, which many of you have probably heard of. It's just a benchmarking tool. 2,000 transactions per second. Now, there's not many actually systems in the world, especially, that need 2,000 transactions per second. And I could do it on Express Edition. Obviously there's storage limits, but in terms of proving that the database technology can run just sweet on small sets of RAM and small CPU power, 18C Express Edition is just awesome. Okay, these are the questions we received. Now I'm just going to jump across the chat line because we've had one question in particular. Do I know when 19C on-premise will be released? I would love to give you a sort of a cheeky smile and go, yes, I do, but I refuse to tell you because it's part of my employment conditions. Now that would make it sound as if like I live, in the high stratosphere inside Oracle. The fact of the matter is I have no idea when it's going to be released. I don't travel in those circles. I'm just I'm a techie. I like getting down and dirty into the technology. Those decisions are made way, way up the chain. So, if I was lying, I'd say, yes, of course I know. I'm critical to that decision. the reality is it's way out of my hands. So I'm sorry, Vazi. I hope I haven't mangled your pronunciation. I don't know. I wish I did. So these are the questions we received. We'll try get through them today. Capturing DDL operations was actually from last month. We didn't get around to it. That's pretty much the story of my life. I talked too much and ran out of time. Interesting one here, question that came in, the performance of SQLcl, the command line sort of upgrade from SQL Plus. Someone had some performance problems with SQLcl. Aura 12170, and we'll talk about what that is when we get to it. JSON materialized views, that's a 19C feature that raised a question. In memory not working, that seems a fairly vague one. We'll talk about the specific details of that shortly. And if we get time, we'll talk about some RMAN performance. But let's jump straight into it. Hopefully today we'll be able to do lots of demos as well. So we can get our feet wet, so to speak, or get our hands dirty, depending on the cliche you'd prefer to choose. So number one, how do I capture the DDL that's occurring on a database? And this is the question that came in. It's a DBA saying, I'm working especially in a development environment. How do I capture all the DDLs they run on my database so I can compare it with checked in DDL source code control? And I want to give a shout out to the person that asked this question because already I'm thrilled with their setup. Number one is they're letting developers run DDL. I think that's an awesome thing. I hate these shops that are like, yep, everything must come through a single point, might be the DBA, might be system operator, whatever. That's just a way of killing development and killing people's happiness to have interactions in the workplace. If you have DBAs or you are a DBA at your workplace that says, yep, nothing gets touched on my database without my say-so, I think you're doing a disservice to your company. The reality of the world is now we want people to be much more aggressive and flexible with the way they promote database change. And yes, that does carry more risk, but we want to basically be able to deliver fast and deliver hopefully quality at the same time. So the fact that he's letting his developers run DDL on their development system, tick number one for me, that's fantastic. Second tick, he's using source code control. Oh, the amount of people I know that say, how do you know what the real version of your PL/SQL package is? What's the real version of your database view definition? They go, I get it from the database. That's a really bad idea. You don't want that to be the point of record. So having source code control is fantastic. So having those things, I'm super happy with this question. That's why I picked it. But obviously the challenge is, how do you do it? It's actually really, really easy. You just do set the parameter enable DDL logging. Now you might be thinking, well, if it's that easy, why would you waste time in office hours just saying that's how you do it? Surely that could just be done with a tweet or something. Well, there's one very important restriction when it comes to setting enable DDL logging equals true on your database. And that is this. We need to check the fine print. And just to read from the screen, it is licensed as part of the Oracle Database Lifecycle Management Pack. And yes, that is a separately licensed option on top of your Enterprise Edition license. So that one simple little parameter, which is, don't get me wrong, a very cool facility to have, is going to burn you in terms of some license fees. And a lot of people are A, unaware of that, and B, would rather not have to pay that license fee. So yes, it's simple, it's neat, works really, really well, dumps things in the alert log, but I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you already have the Database Lifecycle Management Pack, because of course then effectively it's no extra cost for you. If you don't, just having that part of it, because the Lifecycle Management Pack has a lot of other bits and pieces as well, is perhaps not a justification of that cost. So what do? How do we get around it? You can do a homegrown version. And I thought I'd run through some examples of that for you, just to sort of whet your appetite and so you can see how it's actually fairly easy to do. So let's do a new share. So this is your first option. What I could simply do is just use the standard audit command to actually say audit create table by access. And then I could audit all the other create statements that I choose to do and just list out all the most common DDLs that I'd like to capture from developers. And that sort of works. Let's look at an example of that. I can create a table called T, and then I can go look at DBA audit trail. And I'm using the little @pr script here, which simply lists the columns in row version, so it's easy to read down the screen. And we get some good information. You can see we get the username and the timestamp and stuff like that. And we get the fact that it was a create table command, and we get the object name as well somewhere. Where has it gone back here? Now that's good. What it doesn't do though is actually capture the whole DDL. So for create table, did they create a table with 10 columns? Because when I come back later as a DBA and run, describe on that table, if it's got 12 columns, did they create it with 12? Or did someone alter it and add a few columns? We didn't capture the whole thing. Even though there is a SQL text column in DBA audit trails, the default auditing won't capture that for those kind of DDL operations. So let's continue on. I'm going to create a table called DDL log that's going to capture all my DDLs. And it's a very simple table. In this example, I'm just having a timestamp and the actual SQL text of the DDL. So now I need to capture it. I'm going to use a database level trigger to do that. And we can see I've got DDL grabber after create or alter or drop on the database. So I'm capturing everything. And these are a couple of the nice little functions that are available to you inside these style of triggers. I've got the SQL text function, which creates me an array of all the Oracle, the DDL text that actually made up the SQL. It's broken up in pieces. The return value is the number of pieces, so I can just loop through from 1 to n. And in this case, I'm just concatenating up to 32 characters, or 32K. I could actually put that in a TLOB if I wanted to be very thorough. And then I'm inserting it into my DDL log. So there's my trigger. Let's give it a go. I'm going to drop my table. I'm going to create my table. And I can look at my DDL log, and you can see, yes, I've got a timestamp, and I've actually got the entire text of the DDL statement. That I like because it is literally what the developer actually threw at the database. And I don't want to turn this into like a witch hunt, but one of the things that is very useful sometimes is sometimes in a common shared environment, you'll have developer emails flying around going, who dropped this column? Who added this column? Who broke my PL SQL package? And you get a bit of that sort of, it wasn't me kind of stuff going on. In this way, you can actually go back and actually see what DDLs were run. Now, as it stands, you can see there, I've only got the date and the DDL. That doesn't really give me a great deal of information, but it's a trigger. It's PL SQL. We can extend upon it. So I'm going to connect to sysdba. Now I'm going to recreate my DDL log table with a whole stack of other attributes as well. So I've got the timestamp and the SQL text, but I've got the host, the IP address, the module, etc., etc. All of these things are actually readily available to us using some simple functions in the database. So I'm going to scroll up. This trigger is a bit bigger now. I've recreated my trigger called DDL grabber. Once again on create, alter, on drop on the database. But this time, the advantage of doing it in a trigger as opposed to normal auditing is I have total flexibility and control. I'm making up some scenarios here, but in this case, I'm only interested, for example, in DDL where the owner is Scott or my user account, or I could list as many as I want. I could even make references to, say, the call stack. I might have some routines that are called nightly batch that do a lot of DDL, and so I don't want to capture that in my DDL log table. Or, for example, I could say, well, I don't want to do anything that's coming as part of the scheduler jobs. So once I'm starting to handcraft my own DDL capture, I have that increased flexibility of deciding what I want to capture and how I want to capture it. The identification of SQL text is the same as before, but you can see in a trigger, I have access to all these great sys context variables, which lets me capture who requested it, what terminal they're on, the timestamp, the machine, all sorts of good information. And finally, as well, I can even do things like if I'm capturing when someone, say, altered a package or a package body, maybe because obviously these things can be very, very large, and in a development environment, they're normally regularly reshuffled because that's what development is, changing code. I might just choose to record the fact that, yes, someone's changed it, but not actually record the actual text itself. But as I said, this is just a scenario example. You can do whatever takes your imagination because you have fully access to the code. So I'll enable the trigger. In fact, one thing I should have noted was I created that trigger in disabled mode. And we talked about this on an office hours a long time ago. My view is every single trigger you should create should always be created in disabled mode, because in that way, if the trigger doesn't compile, you haven't broken your system. And in this case, if I created a broken trigger here, then from that point onwards, every create, alter, or drop would fail because the trigger would fail, which wouldn't obviously be so nice. So I made sure it compiled, then I turn it on to make it enabled. That's my best practice from now on. And connect as my user, so I'll drop a table, I'll create a table, I'll alter a table. And once again, printing out information now, this time from my DDL log, I can see I've got that nice useful information. There's the name of my machine. Guess what? I'm running on my own IP address. I was running SQL+, which is what we're running here. And there's the syntax, etc. And I get the object name. So nice and easy to do, right? And off we go. So I've just dropped the trigger at the end there to make sure we clean up for the rest of the demos. So that was capturing DDL operations. As I said, lots of flexibility there, lots of easy options to look at. Just makes it very, very nice and easy to run. You can use a normal auditing, and as I said, you can use enable DDL logging if you are licensed for that. Let's move on to our next question. Let's have a look at the time. It's looking bad already. SQLcl performance. In fact, just before I start, I will actually fire up SQLcl, obviously. So I have that rating in a window so we can do a demo. Okay, that's there, but let's talk about the performance problem first. SQLcl performance. Here is the question that came in. I ran some code in SQLcl and it was fine. But when I put that code into an anonymous block, it ran much more slowly. And that person said, well, maybe it's a PL SQL. Maybe the way PL SQL processes SQL is different to the way SQL is run just from the command line or in just normal running routines. So maybe it's that. But then they said, well, I repeated the same example in Toad, as in some code and then in anonymous block. Or they went and said, okay, I can do it in SQL+ in just as direct SQL or anonymous block. And I didn't see that discrepancy. So what's going on? And I thought we'd do some demos because this is something I discovered. I had to speak to the SQLcl guys about how this actually works. And we'll do some demos as to explain what's going on. Quick look at the chat line. Efficient way to find the empty partitions in a database on a set of tables. Yes, there is, Kevin. I'll respond to you offline because I get a feeling we might not run out of time today, but I will respond to you offline. Can you throw your email address in the private chat line, please, and we'll get to it after the session. So let's do a demo of why SQLcl is a little bit special when it comes to running some code. So to show the demo here, we're going to look at the way SQLcl processes code, both as plain SQL code and as an anonymous block. So I've created a table here. It's just got some 10 rows in it, and we've just got rows 1 to 10 with some random timestamps in there. The content of that really isn't so important. It's really the queries we're going to run on it. So I'm going to run a query. I've added this fake hint. There is no real hint called find me, but I've added it in there such that we can go looking in $SQL later to find this SQL. So I'm doing select find me from T2 where the X is greater than the timestamp December 2017. And then when I run that query, there were no rows selected. I chose a timestamp so we wouldn't clutter up the screen, but there were no rows came back. Let's go look in $SQL and see if we can find that SQL. And as you might expect, there it is verbatim. Now you might be thinking, gee, Connor, that's the least interesting demo I've ever seen, which is true. By itself, SQL and SQLcl just gets processed exactly as passed to the database. Let's now take that exact same SQL. I'm going to flush out the shared pool so there's no evidence of that SQL in there anymore. And I'm running the exact same SQL. You can see there on lines 3 and 4, but now it's just an anonymous block. I'm just going to loop around, and as we saw before, this returns no rows, but we've processed the SQL in an anonymous block. Let's go look now in SQL. Take a look at that. It is not your SQL verbatim. Now, people who are familiar with PL SQL will know that PL SQL goes through a normalization process of converting the SQL to uppercase and removing white space, etc. SQLcl has done that, but also look at what it's actually done with the literal values. You can see in the toTimestamp function, we no longer have 20th of December and DDMONYYYY, those two strings. SQLcl by default intercepts all those literals and replaces them with bind variables. It's like doing its own customized version of cursor sharing. Why is it doing that? A setting came into SQLcl a few versions ago that I was unaware of called secure literals, and it defaults to on. That's one thing I wanted to stress here. Secure literals, as the name sort of suggests, says take every literal I find in an anonymous block and replace it with a bind variable. And we'll talk about why that might be the case shortly. So if I turn secure literals off and flush out the shared pool, if I rerun that anonymous block we just saw before, as if it's been sent to the database for the first time because the shared pool's been flushed, when I go look in SQL, you can see it now displays the behavior you would expect to see in all the other Oracle tools, SQL+, Toad, etc. So secure literals defaults to on in all versions, all recent versions of SQLcl, and you'll see the same behavior in SQL Developer in recent versions because they use the same engine. So be aware of that what you've got now is, by default, we will intercept SQLs we find inside anonymous blocks in SQLcl and SQL Developer, and we will strip out the literals and replace them with bind variables. So that's an explanation of what's going on there. Now, what that doesn't explain is why this person saw a performance difference, because on the side of it here, this looks like perhaps a good thing. You know, maybe I don't want to have any literals in my SQL. It might improve the benefits of sharing SQL, etc. So why are we doing it? We'll come to shortly, but let's examine the performance problem that this person was having. So I think it was number 2, yeah. So I'm going to set my secure literals back to default. So this is the normal behavior you would see in SQLcl with no additional customization. I'm going to create my table called T2 again, but this time it's not just 10 rows. You can see the select one from Jules as a Cartesian join. That's 500 times 10,000. That's 5 million rows in there. So it's a lot bigger now. And I'm putting an index on that timestamp column called X. So there's an index on there. So now I'm going to query in an anonymous block all the rows from 20th of December 2017 onwards. It ran very, very fast because there's no rows for that. Now I run another anonymous block with 20th of January 2015. Now that's taking a long, long time to run. In fact, as I can see, we stare at it. Now that seems a bit strange. It took 13 seconds. Now maybe we're just consuming a lot more data there. But what's actually happening is because SQLcl is intercepting both those SQLs and replacing them with literals, now they are the same SQL. Sorry, replacing them with binds, I should have said. It's from the top. Because SQLcl is replacing both of the literals in both those SQL statements with binds, they now become a single shared SQL because the only difference between them was the literal values. So if I go look at the execution plan for that single SQL, for that SQL ID of, let's scroll back a bit, CZ86, etc., they are both using an index range scan on that index. Now, the issue with that is the second query was getting all the rows from 2015 onwards, which actually happens to be the entire table. So even though we were scanning the entire table in our second query, because it got used the execution plan from the first query, because it's now a shared SQL, we have this issue of it reused the index range scan and ran really slowly. If I actually did a plain old explain plan, not an anonymous block, for that second query back in 2015, now that the database can see the literal values, you can see it would have done a table access full. And if I actually go ahead and run it with secure literals off, you can see it should have finished in 3 seconds, not 13 seconds. And so that's a little catch here as to, you've got to be careful that if you have secure literals set to the default and you have wide-ranging values of literals in your anonymous blocks, then you might start seeing some quirky behavior. And one thing that is worthwhile noting is you're only going to see it in SQLcl and SQL Developer. Once you promote that code into stored procedures, into other environments, if it's running through the CX Oracle driver for Python, Node, etc., or any other third-party tool, odp.net, etc., you're not going to see that behavior. It won't be consistent. So if you do have a wide variety of technologies that connect to the database, then you might want to have a look at SQLcl and change that setting such that it respects all the other environments that currently, so you have that nice consistency. Let's go to a new share. Having said that, the obvious question is, why? Why are they doing this? Because it's not like we are manually or explicitly setting cursor sharing to false, which is something that we generally try to recommend against. Why would SQLcl choose this behavior when none of the other tools do so? It's actually a security enhancement. The general understanding here is that the kinds of things you might see in anonymous blocks coming through SQLcl are things that might have sensitive literals in there. I put a fictitious example in there. You might have a routine called set password with the actual new password sitting there as a literal string, or you might have usernames, or in particular, one of the common uses we use for SQLcl and SQL Developer is doing anonymous blocks to set up all its services and endpoints. So all of those things are potential leakages because you would see them in SQL just sitting there as literals. So the SQLcl team made a decision that whenever we see anonymous blocks, we will assume the worst and mask out all those literals. So that's why they chose anonymous blocks, because they're the most common environments you would see calls to facilities that might be passing in sensitive information. Whether I agree with it, I'm probably sitting on the fence. I can see the appeal of the extra security, but even if it's masked out of SQL, the reality is if you get a SQL plan, you're going to be able to capture some of that information from the other XML column, or you can simply call DBMS XPlan with this display cursor with the extended format of plus peaked binds, and you're going to capture a lot of that sensitive information anyway. So at the moment, I'm probably leaning toward having secure literals set to off in my SQLcl just to bring it into alignment with all the other tools. If all the other tools change this process, then obviously we'd have a consistency again, and that's where we'd end up. But I thought I'd show it to you because you might get some interesting results when you're running SQLcl anonymous blocks. Number 3, let me just have a quick drink, a little breather. Question from Lilith. Will ACS step in after several executions of the same SQL and SQLcl? Yes, you would expect it to. However, ACS is only going to peek in if it is positive that those SQLs are bind sensitive, and which may be the case. But for example, the example I gave there and there had no histogram on it, and both those values were inside the upper and lower bounds of the table. So ACS is perhaps not going to kick in all the time that you would like it to. So something to be aware of. But yes, a valid point. Next one, Aura 12170. Now, I'm not expecting everyone on the call just to go, oh, yes, of course, 12170. Savvy DBAs on the call probably may recognize at least the 121 at the start, and normally error messages in the 12,000 range are actually related to some sort of SQLnet problem, like a TNS, 12154, et cetera. So we are talking about SQLnet here. And here's the question. We run a reporting query against all of our databases from a central location using DB links. And this is a common thing I see. Someone has, say, a monitoring routine or some sort of investigative routine as a DBA, and they reach out to each database, and they either, they create a database link to database 1 and they query that, and they database link database 2, etc. And they simply go around through all of their databases. If one of those databases is down, we get Aura 12170. How can we avoid skip those Oracle databases which are down? So did I put a demo in here? Yes. So one thing I should specify first is error messages that come out with 12170 or in this kind of range, even though they come back to you in the database as Aura 12170, often they're not really an Aura error message. In fact, if we ran it at the command line, if you do a TNS ping on a non-existent location, you don't get Aura 121 something or other, you get TNS dash as back. And so when it comes back to the database, it gets turned into an Aura message. but that has some implications as to how you're going to trap it and handle it. So let's run a demo. Hopefully that's the name. Let's run our demo. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a couple of entries from my own personal tnsnames.aura file here. And you can see here I've got two. I've got one called dead, and as the name suggests, this is a database that actually doesn't exist. I've simply picked an IP address that I know is not active on my network and a random service name, which obviously doesn't exist, but that's irrelevant because it's not, I simply won't be able to reach that host anyways. That's a genuine dead database. And this one called dead2, which we will come back to later in the demo, it's on host 40, which actually is obviously this machine. So it actually is contactable, even though the host is 40, but the service name is fictitious as well. But let's just focus on dead for the time being. Now, this demo might take a little bit of a while to run because I have to show you the timeout. So at the host level, if I do a TNS ping on dead, as you can imagine, it's sitting there busily trying to reach out to host 192.168.1.99, which is not responding. And so we get to sit here and twiddle our thumbs waiting for this to respond. And so if anyone wants to sing a song or put a joke in the chat line, they can while we wait. Oh, it's back. And as you can see, we actually got TNS operation timed out in this case. This was 12535, but in effect, it's when it comes to Oracle, you'll see the message has been changed. So let's assume the database was meant to be up. We didn't know that TNS ping result. I just wanted to prove it to you. So I create a database link dead using dead, and now I try query it. So I'm now going through that same process of reaching out to the tnsnames.aura, finding the dead entry, trying to connect to it through the SQLnet, and obviously I'm not getting any response. So this is what you would see from inside the database. And once again, we can twiddle our thumbs and wait. When we do the video of this, we'll chop all this out, obviously, but for you poor victims on the call, you have to sit and watch my database struggle to find something that is never going to be there. As it tries, and it tries, and it tries. Oh, come on, Mr. Database, I haven't got all day. We got people on the call waiting to do things. And it's back. And there's the problem that the questioner came up with. Aura 12170, I got a TNS Connect timeout. How do we solve this? You might be thinking, well, I'll do it this way. I'll declare an exception called cannot get there. I'll remap it to when I get 12170, which is the error we got, and then I'll run it. I promise you this, I think, is the last time we have to sit and wait. And so now this is perhaps our first attempt at a workaround. I'm trying to get to the view tab at dead. I'm going to fail. That's going to raise Aura 12170. That should fall down into the cannot get there exception, and we'll just simply put out he's dead, Jim, and we could then move on. So this is the standard mechanism we use for capturing an Oracle exception, and we can use pragma exception in it to map unknown exceptions or unnamed exceptions to particular error message numbers. And the reason I was talking so long is I knew what was going to happen. These particular kind of exceptions, where I simply couldn't reach out across a database link, do not get caught. You can't remap them with exception in it. We still blew up our actual anonymous block there. That's a problem because now we can't handle that exception in the conventional manner. So what do? I thought about, let's think of it another way. Let's run TNS ping on the target to see if it's available. And then if it is, then we'll actually proceed and actually run a query against it. And if it's not, then we could then skip it. So we need to know in advance before we even run our query if that link is going to work. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg. You know, how do I know if I can run a query against it? Well, I have to run a query against it. So we're a bit stuck. And the other thing is, you know, unless I'm running a lot of shell scripts and the like, you know, how do I do a TNS ping? I'd like to do all this from inside the database if possible. Well, I'm going to do a little bit of trickery here with an external table. I'm going to create a procedure called setLinkName, and all it does is writes whatever I pass in to a file name called linkname.txt in the temp area. So I'll call exec sync link. Oh, let's try that again. I'll run exec sync. Let's try it for a third time. I'll run exec set link name db18, and all it does is add the word db18 into that file, ctemp linkname.txt. But now I can create an external table, and what the external table is going to use is take advantage of that file, linkname.txt, and it's going to get passed into a preprocessor script called tnstest.cmd. What does that contain? It just sets a few environment variables because you have to when you're running Windows. And then using a little bit of DOS batch magic, it actually cats the file contents out. So it spits out the word DB18 and pumps it into TNS Ping. So it's going to return the output of TNS Ping as a select statement from this external table. If you haven't seen that kind of use of the for loop inside of MS-DOS, yeah, it's a bit of a geekery kind of thing, but a little bit of Googling will get you by. So now when I do select star from link checker, it actually is running TNS Ping. And so if I want to see if a database link is fine, all I have to do is do a select star from link checker, and I could simply do where result like OK, for example, and I'll just pick up this line here. I could pick and choose whatever output I wanted. So if I want to test each database, let's go back to testing our dead guy. So I'll set the link name to dead, all done from inside the database. Select star from link checker. And as you can see, things aren't looking so flash. But one thing I hopefully won't get is an actual error, because I'm not actually trying to query the database called dead. I'm actually just running a TNS ping on the database called dead. And once it times out, that output is going to come back as the result from my external table. You can see there's the output. There's the select. I didn't have a pause in there. And it actually came back. There's a whole output. So as a query now, I can simply say select where result like OK. If I get no rows, then something's wrong. And I could actually use all the other output to send some information out. If I get the word OK, I'm pretty much good to go. I will put a little tiny caveat on that. Remember back at the start, I said I had a TNS entry called dead2. Now, one thing that's important to realize what TNS Ping does, TNS Ping is just a basic reach out over the network to see if a box responds. So dead2, as I said, is a IP address that I can get to, but it's for a totally fictitious service name. So when I run TNS Ping via my select link checker, I get OK. There's no database called QWE. So you need to be aware that you might want to consider very carefully that TNS Ping is perhaps not good enough to actually guarantee that a database is up and running. One thing you could do is, so if I use this, for example, so I should continue the demo before I continue on. If I saw this TNS names result equals OK for dead2, I might then go ahead and create a database link called dead2. And as you can see, there's no guarantee that that's going to actually reach me to a database. Actually, a TNS system does not know of the service. So as I was saying, TNS Ping is one step in terms of validating a database is reachable, but it's not the entire process. One thing you might want to consider doing is in your little TNS testing batch file is one of the best ways of seeing if a database is available is running SQL+ with a fictitious username and password. Because a database must be up and running and servicing connection requests in order to tell you that that is actually an invalid username and password. So you could actually modify that batch file that I showed you to not just do TNS Ping. It could say do a TNS Ping, and if it responds with OK, then do a fake SQL+ connection attempt. And although it sounds counterintuitive, I'll then query for a result of Aura 1017. That would tell me that the database is actually up and responding to requests. So that's how you could handle inaccessibility of certain databases all from within the database. And as you can see, external tables with preprocessors is a great way of accessing all sorts of facilities outside the database and still querying them as if they were simply SQL results. JSON materialized views. I'm putting this in here because a good friend of mine, Tim Hall, anyone that's used Oracle for any length of time knows the incredible oracle-base.com website with a myriad of articles and how-tos and guides for all sorts of amazing Oracle things. And Tim reached out to me because he's been playing with the materialized views in Oracle 19. And 19c, as he said, boasts the ability for query rewrite to occur on JSON materialized views. His demo scripts couldn't get it to work. He reached out to me. I'd love to say that I just went, oh yes, this is the answer. But no, I had to do a lot of investigation. I tried a few things, and which I'll show you shortly. And I also reached out to the people that own the technology inside the company. And after a little bit of back and forth, we nutted it out, and I thought I'd share it with you now. Tim, if you're on the call, this is about to answer your question. If not, you can catch up in the video later. So let's run our demo.
I'm here.
Oh, he's here. There we go. Poor old Tim's been going 45 minutes. How much longer do I have to wait for this? Okay, let's go to 19.2. Now, what did I call the, hopefully this is what I called it. So I'm using actually the scripts you can find on Tim's site. So if you search for JSON 19C, you'll find pretty much these scripts. I simply grabbed them from Tim's demo to make them nice and consistent, so you could follow along as well. I've got a table here called JSON documents, and I've inserted some JSON data into it. So far, so good. What I'd like to do is have a materialized view that can give me some performance advantages, because let's face it, diving into a complicated JSON structure and pulling out the fragments and turning it into relational data is a CPU expensive and costly process. So if I could have a materialized view do that once, then ideally queries should be able to rewrite to take advantage of that. So here's an example of what we've done. We've got our JSON documents table, and using the JSON table clause or expression, we can actually, for lack of a better term, relationalize, I'm not even sure that's a real word, but convert our JSON structure into relational data. So there's our materialized view. I want it to be query rewrite, so I'll put that on line 3. And you can see it, when I query my materialized view, it has produced now a relational version of that JSON data. So that's pretty cool in its own right, but obviously I don't want to have to go tell all my developers, oh, by the way, when you want to do a JSON table expression expansion, make sure you use the materialized view because that'll be quicker. That's what we want query rewrite to do for us. So we flushed the shared pool, and this was Tim and my own first attempt at this. We're querying just the attributes from the JSON documents that are already in the materialized view. So there's my result. Did it rewrite? No. No reference to the materialized view in there. It just queried JSON documents. So it worked fine, but it didn't get the performance benefits that we were after. So then we tried some, let's try other ways. And the reason I put these in there is if you're ever trying to dig into why materialized views don't rewrite, or in fact, any kind of problem that isn't working as you'd expect, I got these from Tim's site, but in particular, it's just a show of the thought process of find different variations as to what might be the cause of the problem. So the first query we're using the dot notation, maybe that's an issue. So now we've resorted to using JSON value to see if that fixes it. It's the same query, I'm using JSON value. Did that get rewritten? Unfortunately not. So then maybe we need to get the data types exactly right. So you can see here we've extended the JSON value commands to actually have returning number, returning varchar2, etc. Maybe that's the secret to getting rewrite. And unfortunately, no. The obvious thing is, well, let's run the query that is exactly the same as the definition of the materialized view. If anything was ever going to be rewritten, it would be a query that matches 1-for-1 with the definition of the materialized view. So we did that. And not even that got rewritten. So you can see the thought process that Tim was going through here and myself. I continued on with a few other options. I thought maybe it's only rewrite occurs if I gather stats, so that stats are available to the optimizer. Maybe I need to set query rewrite integrity to trust it, to give the optimizer a little bit more looseness in terms of whether it chooses to rewrite. And nope, that didn't rewrite either. Still the same problem. So then I thought, what happens when we normally have a problem with query rewrite, whether it's JSON or anything else? We normally use the dbms enview explain enview command, and we can pass in the materialized view. So you have to pre-create a table to do that. That's the table created. You can see at the top there. That's RDM Oracle Home RDMS admin enview.SQL. I think. Unfortunately, I echoed it out in the demo. But I run that. Oh, here we go. And I look at my enview capabilities table. And this is really frustrating because it actually says, yep, all the rewrite facilities are available to you. At which point I'm like pulling what hair I have left out of my head going, it says it'll rewrite. I've given it 10 different attempts to rewrite it and the damn thing won't rewrite. So then I thought, well, maybe it has to be huge. Maybe it has to be attractive to the optimizer for a rewrite. So I cranked up the number of rows and number of blocks to make these objects huge. So the optimizer would have a vested interest in rewriting them. And nothing. So at this point, things weren't looking so good. In fact, I skipped over one thing. You may have just picked it up, maybe not. I even had the rewrite hint in there to force a rewrite, and it didn't work. At this point, I was ready to give up. And so I thought, well, let's go back to first principles. And I reached out to some people inside Oracle. They said, query rewrite integrity is not an issue. Set that back to default. I've dropped the materialized view. This is the critical thing. Look in my columns definition. For any column to be eligible for a query rewrite, they must be defined in the JSON table to be error on error and null on empty. Those settings must be provided. Otherwise, those columns are not eligible for query rewrite. So now when I run this query, what? I was too slow. That's a disaster. Let's try again. I have to cut and paste. Bang, and bang. There we go. Whew. You can see how small my shared pool is on this machine, how fast things get aged out. But so I ran a query, the original query that Tim was trying to rewrite using our nice flexible dot notation, because we have the on error, on null, etc. definitions. There we go. We actually got the materialized view rewrite involved in there to actually pick up the information. So that's pretty cool. And that solves Tim's problem. So let's go back to the notes. Unfortunately, that information is not currently in the documentation. So these are the rules you need to be aware of. One thing is, this is quite interesting, is if the materialized view is defined as a refresh on statement, you don't need the enable query rewrite. It can just happen anyway, which I thought was quite interesting. The materialized view must be created with a refresh status on statement. That's the only ones that will be rewritten. You have with rarity or with primary key as per normal. The definition must be a simple join between the master table and one JSON table, and the only JSON table columns are with error on error, null and empty are used for rewrite. That's obviously the critical part that Tim had missed in his examples. But there's a whole stack of things it can rewrite. I didn't show them in the demo, but it rewrites JSON exists, it rewrites JSON value, and even the simplified dot syntax. Full JSON table rewrite is coming later. There are some restrictions on what are there. Sadly, those 4 things are not currently in the documentation, but they will get there hopefully in due course. So 8:54, look at that. We are going to get you out of here 6 minutes early. How cool is that? Because every month so far, I run over time and everyone's upset with me. So thank you very much for attending. We'll cover those other questions next month. I'm off to Holland tomorrow. And so if you're coming to the Apex conference in Rotterdam, please come in and say hello. Let's talk office hours, talk tech, talk Apex, talk SQL, talk PL/SQL, talk anything. If you won't see you till next month, thank you very much for being on the call. Don't forget to donate to the New Zealand Help Fund if you're that way inclined. And I'll see you next month for another DBA office hours. Take it easy, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.